we thought we would start tonight by talking to you about who Breathe is as a practice, I guess to sort of set the scene for where we see ourselves in the broader picture of architecture. And this goes to sort of the conversation of what can you be as more than an architect when you graduate from your thesis semester. So we believe that we're a values-driven practice, and so this means that we make decisions not just based on profit, but also on the betterment of the planet, society, and people's lives. And so we believe that humanity and the planet matter. We use design as a weapon for good to build a better future. And so we serve 3 clients as part of our practice. The first one is the one that we all know about. It's the principal and it's the client that pays us. And sometimes it's the only client that architects serve, but we think it's fundamentally important to serve more than just the client who pays us as a client. So the second one is the people who have to live with and in our buildings. So specifically not just the people in our buildings, but the people who live around them, who experience them on the street, who occupy them, who go to the cafes that we build, who sit on the streetscape that these buildings are built within. And we want them to have a positive experience with our buildings as well as the people who live there, or work there, or stay in the hotel, whatever it happens to be. And the planet, without which the building is irrelevant. And so that sounds pretty grim, but it becomes a really fundamental driver for all of our projects to strive to be more sustainable than the last and to really be giving back to the planet and not just taking from it. And so we see ourselves as change agents and advocates for the people in the cities in which we live and work. And I guess part of what we're going to talk to you about tonight is how to be an advocate for yourself and your own architecture practice, but also for the people who live with your buildings and the planet who, without which the buildings are relevant.
And yeah, we've got someone that works with us and her title is business development and advocacy. So her role is split between those 2 things. So we pay someone to kind of advocate for changes with the National Construction Code or at the Institute of Architects or whatever that may be.
Or the Gender Equity.
Or the Gender Equity Committee, yeah.
And so we approach our practice through a triple bottom line lens. Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about triple bottom line?
Sure. So historically, the bottom line refers to an accounting term, meaning at the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet, the bottom line is how much profit you make. A triple bottom line means that you don't just account for money, you also account for the cost to society, to the people. So who's making the things that you live in? Where is that being made? Are they being treated equitably? And the other thing is, it also looks at the environmental cost. So what is the cost to the environment for the product that you're about to purchase? So a triple bottom line means it means financial, it means social, and it means environmental. And if you think about what brand probably displays that best, it would be Patagonia. So you can buy a wetsuit from Rip Curl, I don't know, Michael, for what, $200? How much?
Jesus, I haven't bought a wetsuit in a while.
I don't know, but on special you buy. Let's say it's $500 from Rip Curl, but you go to Patagonia down the road and you buy a wetsuit and it's $900. And why does it cost $900? Because they've factored in the environmental cost, the carbon cost, the types of materials they look at. They have a lifetime guarantee on their products, which means they will fix their wetsuit forever. And I've got a friend with a Patagonia wetsuit and he's had it fixed 6 times and he keeps going back and they're like, oh, this is interesting. You've got a 96 original, whatever it is, and he still fixes it. So that's a company that does triple bottom line accounting. So it looks at, who do they employ, how do they employ them, make sure that that's equitable. It looks at the environmental cost of the product that they build in. And so if it costs more because they need to choose an environmental material, they will choose that. And then it looks at the financial cost to make sure that they generate a profit. And Patagonia has just made a decision to gift all of their shares to not-for-profits fighting for the planet. So they've just donated $3 billion worth of shares to companies to drive kind of mission change. And but I would say that business is very successful. So you can run a very successful business that doesn't just focus on making money. So these are these 3 parts, right? Environmental, social, and financial. And the financial part is really important, right? And so we try to do that. We try to make money and still do all of these things, because if we can't make money, we can't continue on our mission. So you've got to kind of balance all 3 of those things simultaneously.
And it's through that triple bottom line lens that we try to find big, clear ideas to endure design and delivery and to empower our collaborators. And so it's your job as architects to find the big idea and to make it great, because it will go through a lot of changes along the design process. But if you can have a clear and succinct idea that targets all three of those triple bottom lines, then that can lead to a really successful project or a really successful business or career path. But finding values that align with those three things is really important to us as a business.
So this project in Sydney, that previous project, Arcadia, that was for Defence Housing Australia, who had built some of the grimmest housing in the country for families of people that were out fighting to defend our nation. When they came to us, the brief was to build something that actually built community rather than eroded the community for the people that were living there. So when we built 152 apartments, we broke it into 4 parts. So there's 4 cores, 4 entries, 4 smaller communities. They also wanted to make it sustainable. So we specified recycled bricks and we held the line on that. Doesn't sound like a big deal, right? But there was 500,000 or 450,000 recycled bricks in that project, and became the biggest recycled brick building in the Southern Hemisphere. And through that, we literally changed the prices of recycled bricks, not only in Sydney, but also in Melbourne, Adelaide and Brisbane through the course of this project, because they bought every recycled brick out of the east coast of Australia, which pushed up the prices of recycled bricks, which meant that all the demolition yards that couldn't be bothered cleaning the bricks decided that it was now at $2.30 a brick instead of $1.40 a brick. They all decided it was worth doing that. And so it put more recycled bricks back into the system. So this one project changed the value of recycled bricks on the East Coast.
Our projects are designed to have positive impact. So something as little as a brick and changing the price of a brick can change the way that demolition contractors work. So, thinking about something that might seem small or insignificant in changing from a recycled brick to a carbon neutral brick can actually have an incredibly big impact in sort of the ripple effect of a decision throughout a project.
Yeah, so since that time, we've been working with Brickworks, who now make a carbon neutral brick. I mean, Barney, we can talk all day about offsets and the problem with that, but the important thing is that it exists, and that they're dealing with their own carbon in the fabrication of those. And in 20 years of practice, we'd never specified a new brick until that brick came onto the market, and now that's the only brick that we specify.
Or a recycled brick.
Yeah, well, although we still focus on carbon neutral bricks because we want to push the barrow out, and we want other people to start specifying carbon neutral bricks, and we're already seeing it. We saw it roll out at the village.
And so for us, the triple bottom line goes beyond the architecture that we build and into ways that we as a practice can give back. So this started with the Upfield Urban Forest, which was sort of a guerrilla planting regime that was started by one person, and that then the Breathe Architecture Studio incrementally got involved in. And so for anyone who's ridden their bike along the Upfield bike path, it's a very fierce urban environment. It is, maybe 2.2 metres wide at some of the widest points. And it's all concrete with chain wire fence on either side. And so just by planting some small vegetation on the side of it, it starts to actually feel like a pleasant place to ride your bike. It starts to deal with some of the wind tunnels that occur through there, and it gives some relief to that space and makes it a really pleasant bike ride rather than one where you're just constantly worried about hitting a chain wire fence and coming off your bike in peak hour traffic.
So there were 2 women basically trying to vegetate 11 kilometres of rail corridor on their own, and at the same time as they were guerrilla planting trees, VicTrack, who owned the land, was spraying them with Roundup. And so for every 10 trees that they'd plant, VicTrack would kill 9. And so we did a couple of simple things. So Mark Mitch, who you'd know, is one of your co-tutors. We just employed our graduate architect, Mark, to build them a website, a Squarespace website for $99. We then went and bought them some tree guards, and we bought them some rootstock because we've got a wholesale account with Plantmark. And then we had a couple of workshops where we went out and helped them, and then we helped push the Upfield Urban Forest on social media, and they went from being kind of 2 women doing everything on their own to being a kind of organised rabble with some support around it. And with the tree guards, when VicTrack would spray the Roundup, it wouldn't kill the trees, and once the trees got beyond a certain point, VicTrack couldn't stop it. So, you know...
And importantly, this gives back to the bike path, but it also helps improve the urban environment around our projects without building anything at all. So sometimes the answer is not architecture, it's in landscape or urban generosity that helps our projects thrive. And so this helps the urban ecology, it helps the bike path be a better public space. It also means that our buildings sit in a better urban environment, but we didn't have to build anything to facilitate that.
And we don't work anywhere near as hard as Tamar and Joe Conlon, right? They do most of the work. We just did a little bit of targeted work to help them kind of, you know, get rolling.
The next one is Florence Street Pocket Park. So looking at the space between Nightingale 1 and the Commons on Florence Street, and because we've taken cars out of the ground floor of those buildings, we don't have roller doors and crossovers, and we don't have cars going into the street front of those buildings. So we actually, where this is a dead-end street hitting the rail line, we don't need vehicle access. And so looking at an opportunity to turn that into a park that can be occupied by people and have landscape and, you know, lobbying the council to try and make that happen to make for a better community space between our buildings.
And also, again, having, you know, some talented graduate architects working with us. We just did a couple of little renders before showing the end of the street in asphalt with the cars parked on it, and after showing the end of the street cut off with some grass, you know, and a tree planted in there. Michael, basically like the end of Duckett Street. We dropped little surveys off in every cafe around the corner, A1 Bakery, Tibet's Bakery, and we got like, you know, 420 signatures in a week. We took that to the council at a council meeting and then got council to agree to fund the closure of the end of Florence Street, to dig up the asphalt, to turn it into grass and a tree. So all we're waiting for is that final building in the end of Florence Street to be built, and then that will happen. And that took, for us, it took about, you know, I don't know, 25 hours work from us. But it'll be a massive, you know, it'll be a great outcome for everyone in Brunswick. After the Christchurch shooting in 2019, we live in the Lebanese quarter of kind of, you know, of Brunswick, of Sydney Road. We know the guy that owns this silo. We know people that work at the local, you know, or that worship at the local mosque. And we knew people from the Islamic Museum. We spoke to them about what we could do to help. Anyway, Tamara, that works with us, worked with them to talk about this particular image after the Christchurch shooting, to talk about an inclusive community, and that, you know, at a time of tragedy, how a community can come together. And so Tamara from our office crowdfunded $12,000 in about 23 hours. And then the person that had painted the side of Nightingale for us flew down to Melbourne. She worked with the Islamic Museum, and she painted this in like 5 days. You know, so it was kind of an incredible fast turnaround after that. But what we were trying to say, you know, to the broader community in Brunswick is that, you know, like Jacinda Ardern said, that we are one, you know, and that we're all here together.
Cobargo, so after the bushfires that ravaged New South Wales, we reached out to one of the firefighters and offered to help with their rebuild efforts on their home. And he, with incredible generosity, said, look, thank you, but my home is insured and I am going to be able to rebuild my home, but there's this incredible human in our town who's actually the town Santa, and his home has burnt down, and, you know, their insurance doesn't cover it. Their home has burnt down, their barn with all of their equipment and the sled in which he would ride around town at Christmas time has burnt down. Can you help him? And so Cobargo was, obviously this is about building a building, but the bigger part of this project was about you know, speaking to industry contacts and trying to help deliver this project as affordably as possible for someone who had just lost everything. So the architecture is robust and bushfire resistant. The planning is efficient and pretty simple, and the material palette externally is really, it's very robust. But, you know, we called Taubman's Paint and they donated all the paint. We called Fielders, they donated all the metalwork. We called Fisher Paykel, they donated all the appliances. And so it was more about leveraging contacts that we have and building this project without it being so costly for the people who'd lost everything, and using that as sort of a pilot project to demonstrate how we can help rebuild after natural disaster. So this was about building, but it was also about how we can all rally together after such a tragedy.
We didn't start with a drawing. We started with a list of phone contacts we called everyone we knew. We asked for whatever we could get. We got a list of all the stuff that we got, and then we gave it to Maddie, the head of houses, and said, Maddie, congrats. These are all the materials you've got. Build a house out of this. So, yeah, that's what she did, you know. So, and interestingly, when we finished this project, so during the 2019-2020 fires, there were 3,600 houses lost on the east coast of Australia. They lost their house New Year's Eve in 2019. We had this house finished and then back in by Christmas Eve 2020. So they were back in within 1 year. By the time we went to visit, which was in May the following year, this was only one of 2 houses that had been rebuilt in Cobargo. There were 400 lost in the Greater Cobargo area. And what we've seen since then is massive cost escalation and people, you know, still living in caravans and people selling houses in Cobargo because, you know, it just, nothing's happened fast enough, you know. The other thing that we did with this was that we built a house that was all electric, you know, and that talked about a kind of, you know, a net zero future. And we did a lot of education with Dave and Barbara about why it's important to buy green power, you know. Anyway, it's pretty funny. That's not high on their agenda, but anyway, it was good.
Being advocates and champions for things like Architects Declare that are really close to our heart, sharing our IP really generously about, you know, all the research that we've done on sustainable materials to help empower our colleagues to have discussions about how to specify and use more sustainable materials,
and to help students.
Yep. So if you would like to go and download these guides, they're free and available, and they're an incredible resource that a fair bit of time and energy has gone into. But at the end of the day, we think that, you know, we kind of go back to this idea of building less and giving more. So sometimes the answer is in architecture, and, you know, sometimes more impact can be had by building nothing than by building a building. Sorry, more positive impact, I should say.
Yeah.
But as Rory said, part of what we're here to talk about tonight is a broken system. And so if the system of housing is broken, we've found the most successful way to try and fix that system is actually to design a new system. So not working, I mean, we're still working partly within that system, but breaking out of the traditional mould in the housing market system to fix it.
And understanding all the parts of that system. So whether it be finance or whether it's legislation, understand what those barriers are, you know, rather than fighting where you can't win. We're in Australia. We've had 28 years up until very recently of economic growth. We're one of the wealthiest countries per capita in the OECD. But in the last 20 years, people aged between 25 and 35, their home ownership has dropped off by over 20%, particularly that cohort, first home buyers trying to get into housing. Given that we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, how can we possibly have 115,000 people that were homeless at the 2016 census, because we still don't have the data from the 2020 census, because the then government didn't want to release it leading up to an election. So they're still trying to unpack, you know, what the numbers are now. But, you know, let's be totally honest, homelessness is a policy decision. We have enough money in this country to build a home for everyone. It's a policy decision. So this system is broken, and we're trying to fix it as architects. It's insane. The other issue we have is we've got a big country, we have a wealthy country, and we have an incredibly high greenhouse gas emissions per capita. And the biggest single emitter for us is through the built environment. 2/3 of that is through operational energy, so through inefficient buildings, through you know, the use of electricity and gas. 1/3 is in embodied carbon. The 2/3 from operational stuff is easy to fix. We'll talk about that in a minute. The 1/3 of embodied carbon is pretty tough, and we think we can solve about 30% of that currently. And then the other two big things after that is transit. So we love cars in Australia, and so it's not the heavy transit. It's not buses and trains. It's the light transit. Everyone having their own cars, driving everywhere independently. And then the third thing is industrial agriculture. So if you can all eat less red meat, eat less chicken, eat less pork. I'm not saying don't eat any of it, but if you could eat, you know, more tofu, more vegetables, that'd be great. Yep.
So in looking at the broken system, Breathe Architecture embarked on a pilot project, and that pilot project really focused on this idea of build less to give more. So we take out car parking and we put in the highest ratio of bike parking that Marybeck Council has seen to date. And I sometimes still struggle to find a bike park when I get to work in the morning. But taking out car parking does more than just taking cars out of this building, meaning we don't have the crossover at the front of the street, meaning we can put in a wine bar and a cafe, and we can close off the end of the street to the pocket park. But it also means that we're not digging a basement, which means that we save about $40,000 to $50,000 per apartment by not providing that car park, which means that housing can be delivered at $40,000 to $50,000 cheaper per apartment.
And instead of having a ramp, we have a wine shop, which then got sold for $425,000, which then makes all the housing cheaper. So it makes the construction cheaper, which makes the apartments cheaper. The sale of the retail makes the apartments cheaper.
And then next we take out individual laundries, which means that each living room gets 1 to 2 square metres bigger by taking out the individual European laundries. And then we give back a shared rooftop with great communal space and a shared laundry. So in that shared laundry, there's a ratio of washing machines that it's at about 1 washing machine to 4 residents. So it also means that I could go and put on 4 loads of washing at once if I wanted to. You can use that system however you want, but you also get somewhere to naturally dry your clothes with air, rather than putting a clothes horse in your living room and having moist living environment just sort of festering mould. But you also have a space.
Really selling that, Ali.
Really selling the clothes horse in your apartment.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sell that. There's also then that communal touch point in the communal laundry where you meet your neighbours. Like, everyone has to do their washing at some point, but there's not a forced level of interaction. You could say hi, you don't have to say hello, but it's a sort of a basic human function to do your washing. And so everyone uses that space and interacts in a really sort of, in whatever way they want, whether that's passive or active. And so creating these communal spaces that just start to break down that barrier with your neighbours, while you're all washing your socks. But then also providing this great communal rooftop space for people to come together or have their own private space. We take out air conditioning, which saves us, how much per apartment? I think you said it was $6,000.
$6,000 at the Commons.
Per apartment at the Commons.
And we only take it out when it works, right? So Melbourne's a heating climate currently. So historically, when we did this building, the Commons, we took air conditioning out because it made sense, and our thermal modelling said that we could do that. I think we've got to have a broader conversation about a changing climate, changing humidity with rising temperatures, a changed microclimate because of the wall of towers, the south of us in the city now, and a future which looks like we're going to have longer periods of hotter, more humid days.
But then we make sure that the apartments all cross-ventilated, so they all naturally ventilate, which means there's a better thermal environment. There's also more air changes, so the indoor air quality is improved by having natural ventilation and a cross-flow ventilation through the apartments. We take out, and this is, again, it's a learning process, but in this project we still take out chrome, and so the taps are taken off the production line before they're chrome plated. So the taps that are made of raw brass get taken off the production line and sent straight to site, rather than getting taken off the production line as beautiful raw brass taps, wrapped in plastic, sent to a factory, unwrapped, chrome plated, wrapped in plastic, sent back to the tap manufacturer, unwrapped, quality checked, wrapped in plastic again, and sent to site and put into the building. So not only is there the embodied carbon and the material use in all that sort of shipping and packaging, there's also the fact that chrome is a carcinogenic material carcinogenic process that we don't want people using that material to be exposed to. We also take out as much tile as we can. And so in this project, there's no tiles. And the reason for that is that tiles are high in embodied carbon to make or to produce, and they also have to be glued onto a waterproof substrate. So instead of using tiles, using an extra layer of the waterproofing substrate so that we can reduce the glue and reduce the embodied carbon in the projects.
It's about 17 kilos of carbon per square metre of tiles. So if you can take the tiles out, that's a big saving across an entire building.
Yeah, and so in response, you get beautiful raw brass tapware that patinas over time, and raw FC sheet bathrooms which don't have 100 grout lines with 100 places for mould to grow. And then we take out ceilings and expose the surfaces. And so what we get as a result as well is higher floor to ceiling heights. And so the apartments are more spacious and more generous. We also get better natural light because we've got taller ceilings, and we get easy access to all the services. So if someone wants to change where their light fixture's hanging, all of the services are easy to access, maintain, upgrade as required.
And if you think about, what's also high in carbon, it's not just cement in concrete, but it's also the gypsum in plasterboard. So if you can take out all of the plasterboard, you're saving all of that carbon. You save all of the furring channels that hold the ceilings up. You save all of the stud adhesive, which holds that together. And then stud adhesive with the plasterboard and the furring channels make it hard to recycle.
But what we learned, good design is only part of the equation. So all of those sort of big moves on that project were predominantly design-based decisions driven by architects looking to fix a housing problem through design. But good design was only part of the equation. And as we keep saying, if the housing system is broken, design a new system. So this was about the housing system and not the architecture not just the architecture that was being delivered in a broken system. And so Nightingale 1 is sort of the evolution of that, looking at a different system and model of housing.
And so just to clarify, we thought at the start of the Commons that the problem was architecture and that we could solve it through design and construction. And what we realised through the Commons was that there was a whole bunch of other issues at play, particularly around the finance sector and how that worked, how mortgages were written, how mortgages were valued, how valuers worked, how banks worked, how regulators like APRA wrote rules about what mortgages could be written for what product, and then how projects got funded and who made the decisions in that. So I think that for us, the Commons took from 2007 to 2013 to complete 6 years. And we learned a lot in there. And the thing that we learned the most about was finance and the system to building housing. And Nightingale took us 3 years, 3 years and 2 months, nearly half the time, because we understood the system and we worked out that we needed to play at a different level, which was really at the finance level, to be able to drive these outcomes in a much more meaningful and a faster way. So again, if you think about Patagonia as triple bottom line wetsuits or whatever that is, triple bottom line hiking pants, we thought that we could build a housing model that would be a triple bottom line housing model. We called it Nightingale. And importantly, when you think about all those things, you can start to deliver housing for people rather than housing for profit. You can start to think about a not-for-profit housing model. And the funny thing is when you take profit out, it frees you up to make all the decisions you've ever wanted to make as an architect. And it frees up, other great architects to come and work on projects and not to have to worry about generating a profit all the time. It gives us the ability to innovate in places where no one else will. And when I say that, developers, when Lend-Lease or Mirvac build their great buildings, they've got to respond to shareholders and they've got to deliver particular financial returns, and those financial returns are linked to time. And so when you look at, working with a developer, the thing that adds time is planning and planning risk. And so when you want to change something or challenge something, like car parking, so to be clear, we have a housing crisis, we have a climate crisis, we don't have a car parking crisis. The car parking numbers in Australia were written in 1966, well actually were written in Texas in 1966, and then brought over to Australia because we thought that if Americans are doing it, that must be the right thing to do. The Americans were doing it because they were lobbied by the automobile industry to put car parking into the planning system. So that's how that happened. And our view is that these two things need to be separate. Housing is a basic human right, car parking isn't. The great thing about Nightingale and being able to drive our own financial outcomes means that we get to choose what risks we take. And we thought the car parking risk was worth fighting for. Embedded energy networks, there used to be 3 embedded energy network operators in Victoria. Those embedded energy network operators would operate all of the energy systems in a building. They would buy the cheapest, blackest, dirtiest power they could, and then they would sell it to the residents for as much as they could. And and if I was a developer, I would then get paid by those energy providers or energy networks, and they would pay me $100,000, say, for them to have the rights to operate that energy network and rip you all off. So Fairley Batch from Breathe went to, I think we stopped counting meetings at meeting number 132 to find out what was it that we needed to do to become an embedded energy operator, to be able to change the way that we bought power and how we could save the residents money by passing bulk buy savings and buying only 100% certified green power and passing that through to the residents. And that was probably the hardest thing. Probably the hardest thing we did at Nightingale 1 was not architecture. It wasn't even the car parking thing. It was the embedded energy thing. And now you look at Lendlease, Mirvac, Frasers, Assemble, all have their own embedded energy networks now, and they're all buying 100% green power just like Nightingale. So this has been a really big thing.
Off the back of that, we started to look at how we could do better and how we could make housing more affordable, streets more livable. And so the first part of that was to look at tile house apartments. Tile house meaning part of house.
My God,
in
it all
German.
started with your apartment,
Started with
Michael.
Roper. So Cairo Apartments in Carlton, how many?
What, 19
1923.
and 23 square metres?
23 square metre apartments delivered in 1923 have...
Was it 1923, 1936?
Sorry,
Yeah.
got my numbers wrong.
So let me go back. I was on a jury. I went to visit a small project award. Michael Roper was presenting a renovation to the Cairo Apartments by Best Overend, designed in 1936. We saw a 23 square metre apartment that he designed or refitted, and it was epic. And at the same time, we were wrestling with this idea of housing affordability at Nightingale, and we were told by the Better Apartment Design Standards and by the banks that the minimum size for an apartment had to be 50 square metres. The Commonwealth Bank and the National Australia Bank wouldn't write loans on housing under 50 square metres, and they said it was because of APRA, because of the regulator on mortgages. We went and saw that, and we made it, our mission to find out how do we crack that open. And I went and met with a bunch of banks, and I got way up the food chain, and I got to meet with the CEO of National Australia Bank to say, if we're in a housing crisis, and you guys have $3 billion allocated out to a social infrastructure fund, and part of that's going to be housing, how do you want to make a difference there? And we spoke about it, and then I got to meet with the risk team at NAB, and there's like 23 people in the risk team. And what they were worried about was this, this thing about APRA, that they would be lending money to people that would be outside of these lending rules. Anyway, we went through all of that together with their lawyers, and basically we worked out that as long as we met the amenity requirements under the APRA description, then that NAB would then write loans for it. Once NAB said yes, Bank Australia said yes. Once Bank Australia and NAB said yes, Teachers Mutual Bank said yes, and then Unibank said yes. Once all of those banks said yes, we knew that we could actually start to build small footprint housing. So again, the answer to the small footprint housing in Sky House wasn't the design of a great thing. Like someone has already designed a great small footprint housing solution. The answer was actually understanding how the system worked and how could someone actually get a loan for it.
And so, I just want to touch on, in the case of Cairo Apartments, that small footprint housing as a give back has incredible public open space and green space in a relatively, tight urban fabric like Carlton. In this instance, these residents have access to shared facilities such as the communal rooftop, the laundry, a guest house, and so a bathhouse. And so it is part of the bigger house that they have. Michael's is part of this incredible garden space, and so it's not looking at that in isolation, it's about the amenity that comes with that, and so that's what reduced the risk. Again, so I touched on this just now, but a part of that housing affordability piece for us was to introduce this idea of a guest house, which Jeremy saw happening all over the Netherlands, but by introducing a guest house, which was about the size of a hotel room, owned by the Owners Corporation and rented out like an Airbnb, but for $40 a night, the purchaser information that was coming back through Nightingale's feedback surveys went from saying, I need a small 2-bedroom apartment, to actually, I want a 1-bedroom apartment and I'm going to not stretch my mortgage as far as I can on a small 2-bedroom. I'm actually going to have a little bit more financial freedom. And when my parents come and visit every 6 months, they can book that Airbnb for $40 a night. So buying within the realms of what one needed day to day, rather than stretching and pushing the boundaries of what was affordable just to have an extra bedroom. Streetscape activation. So this is at Nightingale Anstey, and this is a series of 4 small commercial tenancies at about 30 square metres. The streetscape activation also comes down to an affordability piece. In an area like Brunswick, where there's a vibrant artist community, by delivering 30 square metre commercial tenancies, it frees up a ceramicist who wants a small commercial tenancy, needs a space to produce their goods, but also doesn't want to spend a lot on rent. Or one of these commercial tenancies is a remedial masseuse, one's a piano rehearsal space. So there's, you know, a real diversity and vibrancy that starts to activate the street. You have a lot more people coming and going than if it was one big commercial footprint.
You can rent some of these for $200 a week, like as a kind of a ground floor retail.
And then, as Rory touched on, scaling impact, and that's come with its own unique challenges, but it's also an incredible opportunity to be delivering more affordable housing through projects like Nightingale Village.
Well, if you think about the village, it looks like, you know, 6 different buildings, 6 different communities, but it's actually one kind of precinct. The whole thing's carbon neutral in operation. There's one lot of, you know, water tank and rainwater collection. There's one car share hub for 15 share cars. There's consolidated bike parking, you know, under most of the buildings for 450 bikes. And by using the car share hub, which comes off one street, it means that we get to liberate Duckett Street from any cars, and Duckett Street becomes all about people and pedestrian activity and nothing about services or cars. So if you get a chance, check out Duckett Street in the heart of the village. It's incredible. So I want to talk to you aspiring architects. You know, can I just see who's in final year, 5th year? Yeah, Alan. All right, cool. So big choice, right? You get to work out what you're gonna do. Like I assume a lot of you think you're going to draw buildings, right? That's what you've been studying. And I want to talk to you about some people that have chosen to try and tackle a broken system in different ways. So the people that have left Nightingale Night School and that have gone on to make big impacts. Yeah. So you can be change agents, and it doesn't have to be drawing buildings. And, you know, I mean, it's been interesting watching CODA in Western Australia, you know, change from CODA. So it's Emma and Kieran changing to the Fulcrum agency because they wanted to get upstream to have bigger impact, because they thought that architects, you know, were too far downstream to have enough impact. So Kate Fitzgerald started a company in Western Australia called Whispering Smith, frustrated with just building double-fronted brick veneer houses with, you know, all about the car. She's gone on to start her own developments, so small-scale developments, which are about small footprint housing. They're still kind of like townhomes, but they're really beautifully executed and super sustainable. So she's kind of, you know, like a developer architect. Jen Koulas came to work at Nightingale Housing. She was the one that really pushed the boat out on Nightingale Ballarat and Nightingale Bowden in Adelaide, when the Nightingale board were very, very lukewarm on either of those ideas, because despite the big waiting list for Nightingale apartments, they're all focused around the inner north of Melbourne, and not many people wanting to live in Nightingales in Ballarat or South Australia.
Did you say that these students all study here?
Oh, so these are all Melbourne, yeah, sorry, these of course, Rory, are all University of Melbourne students. And these studied, you know, with us, and these are the students that we're kind of the most proud of. They haven't gone off to design, you know, luxurious homes for wealthy people. They've gone on to have massive impact in their careers.
And
Yep.
Jen now works at Homes.
Homes Melbourne. Yeah, she's now working in the city of Melbourne, Homes Melbourne, you know, dealing with the homelessness issue within the city of Melbourne. So Ali works with me, like, you know, as a design lead at Breathe, you know, and so every time we do something, Ali is thinking about, you know, the same way that I do about, you know, systems thinking. Should we be designing anything? Should we be drawing something, or should we be finding, you know, some other solution to it? Lola came to work with us at Breathe. She helped us out when Nightingale was struggling, and then she's gone on to work in the commercial world. So she's now working, helping hospitality ventures kind of, you know, move and scale there. You know, let's talk about, I think that hospitality is important. So not as much impact as Jen, but still heaps of impact. But importantly, she gets paid twice what I get paid. She's not an architect anymore. She engages architects. So, you know, but she understands design literacy, and she helps hospitality ventures scale their growth. Alison, she went to work with Ross Harding at Finding Infinity, and Finding Infinity are the ones that kind of worked with a whole bunch of Melbourne architects to build, a project about making Melbourne a net exporter of energy rather than a net importer. So looking at every aspect of the built environment and how to kind of, electrify the entire city, how to take waste, turn it into a resource. Incredible set of work. And so Alison's been helping him illustrate that and communicate that to everyone. Vishnu, where's Vishnu at?
Vishnu
I was with Sophie.
Short projects.
Yeah, so he's working with Sophie Dyring at Short Projects on social housing projects, on really meaningful projects. This is one of Sophie's projects in Reynard Street, Coburg. Yep. Brendan went to work with Fontic, worked on Nightingale Village for a while as a development manager. He's now working for Mirvac, like one of Australia's biggest property developers. He engages architects, so he builds the short list of the architects that will be working, and he writes the briefs. And so he now brings in sustainability as a key requirement for all of the projects they're doing, and making sure that everything they're doing, in this particular green square area is all 100% electric, making sure that they're buying 100% green power in there, and a net zero in operations. Yep. Steph Siriani heads up the Victorian sustainability team at Lend-Lease, and she's looking at an office tower in the city and how to, instead of fitting out every floor as an individual fit-out construction, basically a kit of parts that can kind of come in and out, flex up and down, and it's like a piece of furniture that can be reused multiple times. Ethan's working at Woods Bagot, head of sustainability Asia Pacific.
Yep.
Incredible role. Woods Bagot's the 6th biggest architecture company in the world, and Ethan is now the head of the Asia Pacific sustainability. And for us, when he was working with us, he designed an apartment building like Yost's greenhouse, I guess, that would grow more food for its residents than they would require. Anthony Richardson started a little website called Simple Dwelling. It's now on YouTube. He's got a channel called Simple Dwelling. He's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and he talks specifically about sustainable housing and messaging, out to the broader world, communicating to the broader world about the importance of small footprint living and sustainability. One last person, Chris Barnett. He didn't study under me, but Chris is an architect, a great architect who went on to establish something called Habitek Systems, which was looking at prefabrication, highly energy efficient wall construction systems, roof construction systems. So instead of us in Australia building things out of sticks and bricks, he looked at a much more sophisticated way to do that. So again, study as an architect, but looking at a broken housing system and saying, how do we digitise that? How do we scale that? And how do we get economy out of that scale? So, there are other people here that choose that path. So anyway, the choice is yours about how you want to have impact, and it doesn't have to be drawing something. Thank you.
Thanks.